So I'll just give you a little background info, and then I kind of want to walk through 3 areas of that we've been learning that I think might be relevant to other urban ag ventures. So kind of our startup story and how we structured the farm, and then also how we just developed the physical space. I'll walk through that. I'll talk through some of the tools and techniques that we've been using as of late, and then I want to talk through some of the tensions that we feel as an urban ag business operating in this field. So in my background, I was involved in social work in school, and got out of there and wanted to be outside. And so I've been kind of going back and forth between urban and rural work in agriculture. So I was out in Montana on a small family farm, just learning the ropes back in 2004, learning what the crops were even back then. So I don't have any farming in my background. And then I was involved in various urban agriculture organizations. So out in Chicago with City Farm and Growing Home, which is an adult agriculture job training program. And then in Cleveland, where there's very robust urban agriculture scene, I was working with a youth job training program. We were building neighborhood farms. So I had the chance to kind of build from the ground up several different styles of urban garden or urban farm. So then in 2011, I found myself in probably a not uncommon situation where I had some farm experience, some management experience, and was kind of itching to put those into practice on my own system, my own farm. But if you've spent time doing those things, you know, maybe as I did, that you're not building up the kind of capital you need to invest in a farm. You know, it's kind of one of the big problems, I think, in any agriculture as well as urban is, you know, if you're learning, you're probably not building up those resources. And if you're building up those resources in another career, then you got to still learn how to farm. So there's not a good pipeline. So anyway, I felt like with my experiences leasing an urban farm, that was a good way to go for me. So I landed in Indianapolis at South Circle Farm. I'm from Indianapolis, so I went back there. So I'll kind of talk through our startup and how that operated. So when I landed in Indy, I was looking around for land, and a nonprofit organization, a community development corporation, a CDC, had just bought this land you see here. This is what it looked like, and an adjacent building. So that field there is about 1.5 acres. And they wanted a creative land reuse, and so they landed on the idea of urban ag without any practitioner to do that. So I stepped in, and I was able to kind of contract with them and help them build up the site and then lease it to start a small business. So they didn't really want to take a farm under their wing. You know, that wasn't their thing, but they wanted this to happen. So it was kind of a perfect matchup in some ways. So they leased that site to me. And so the startup was largely, the infrastructure was largely funded by grants. So they had a large grant to purchase the land and do some of the basic infrastructure. So they were able to do the initial environmental assessment, which is pretty expensive. Phase 1, phase 2 environmental assessments are super important in the city, so you know what you're dealing with in terms of the ground you're working. So they were able to cover that, as well as the fencing and then the initial material to build up the site in terms of soil. I'll talk about that in a second. And then it's fairly expensive to change the zoning, so we had to go through that process, and they were able to cover that too. So all these costs that wouldn't have made sense for just a small entrepreneur to cover, especially since I'm not owning this land, they were able to cover. So when I started leasing, then I was responsible for my own salary, seeds, plants, row covers, all the things you need to run a small farm. So that's what made it possible for both entities to get involved. And then just having that sort of anchor institution, that nonprofit that had been in that area, helped just to kind of give the farm a leg up. It gave us, you know, contacts in the community to get going. So that was really important too. So I kind of like that model of having this anchor institution. You know, it doesn't have to be a CDC. That's what it happened to be here, but you know, a school, a business, a church, something that has resources and land to start out. So I mentioned our site development technique. When we did those initial assessments, we found it's fairly common urban soil. So there were physical obstructions in the soil, probably foundation pieces, things like that, but also hot spots of heavy metals, mostly lead at different spots in the site. So we were recommended to apply a few inches of clean material on top and then to just use, till it in and use that as our ground. And I decided that didn't feel like a good enough solution to the contamination, but it also wouldn't have been great growing ground. So I wanted to start with really good ground to grow in. So what we did was we started calling around all the tree companies we could think of and got them to just start dumping their tree waste there. So we got basically wood chips for free. So this allowed us to create this deep bed of a buffer, a wood chip buffer between the existing ground and our growing plots. So that was all free material. We just had to be persistent, and it took time. But this is, you can see this is after, this is our first month developing the site. So that front end loaders there trying to spread that out and create a platform then we would come in and build beds on top of that. So here you can see us building the beds out. So we just started laying out 50-foot by 50-foot plots. So we did invest in soil up front, soil and compost to build those beds, but it allowed us to build out that 1.5 acres for a much lower price tag than trying to cover the whole thing with fresh soil or excavating. Some folks excavate or putting some kind of barrier on the site. We didn't have to do those things because we were able to take a little more time and bring all that organic material, all those wood chips, and then fresh soil and compost onto the site. So that's literally how we did the whole 1.5 acres. So what you see there is a 1/4 acre developed in the first month or two that we were out there. So then I just started growing on those plot by plot. And by the end of the second season, we'd finally made it to the opposite corner of the farm and built out those plots. So it took time because it took a lot longer when we were growing on it. But anyway, I was able to bring crops to market that first May. Yeah.
That's exactly the same conclusion we came to with these urban lots. Do you have to replenish the chips to keep that buffer maintained?
We do, yeah, we do that a lot because obviously all the pathways and edges were all wood chips, and it breaks down even though we'd put a really thick layer, 2 feet. So we're constantly, and it used to be maybe a dozen loads per year we needed to get out there. This time, we put out maybe 3 loads across the site in different places. But yeah, we do have to replenish that all the time. Yeah.
Sorry, and fertilizing in the fresh wood chips, I would assume you have to add extra nitrogen minimally.
Well, they were, we didn't really mix them in together, so we didn't find the wood chips to be a problem with nitrogen. I mean, it's still soil, and it was trucked in and dumped down, so it did take some time to build it up into a good growing medium. So that first spring, the crops weren't excellent. By the fall, they were good, and then since then, they've been excellent. Yeah. So the other advantage of starting with this nonprofit as kind of our anchor institution is we were able to, there's no picture, we were able to use that nonprofit to raise some money for educational programming. So when I started, I was really clear-eyed because I'd worked for a lot of nonprofits that I knew I had to focus just on growing and selling the crops to make that business work and make that sustainable. But I still wanted those things to happen on our site. So we were able to raise some funds to operate some education programming separate from the business, kind of parallel. They used the site and we cooperated, but as the farm entity, it wasn't sustainable for me to try to operate education programs and the farm. If I wanted the farm to work, I wanted that to be separate. So we were able to use that nonprofit to raise some funds for that. So, so I think it's a good model as a startup if you want to be an enterprise on leased land in the city. It puts a lot of that startup capital onto another entity, but there are some kind of thorny issues to navigate. So working through Upfront, what does that other institution want out of this? What does that nonprofit or that church or school or business that is helping you get going? What do they want from it? In my case, the organization, they just really wanted a creative reuse of the land and something in their neighborhood that was different, and so they didn't have a lot of expectations. But in other models I've seen like this, they usually want you to donate part of the produce or sell part of it at a discount to a certain group of folks, or to do some program on site, something like that, which is fine, but you just have to make sure it fits into your business model, because as I'll talk about, just getting the business to make ends meet is enough of a task. So just being clear about what does each party need out of it. Sustainability of the organization. So this is really important. The nonprofit that owned this land and had all that grant money to put up a fence and put in a water line, they basically closed 1 year into the farm's existence. So at that point, we were thrown into limbo. I had committed to making this my livelihood for a 5 to 10 year period, because I thought that's how long it would take. And all of a sudden, nobody owned it, and it went back to the city. So we were in limbo for 2.5 years, and actually got a 2 years and a few months into it, I got an eviction letter from the city, and they're like, "Don't worry, we just, for legal reasons, had to evict you, and it's May of a growing season." And so, the stability of the organization is really important. And so in this case, what happened was we found a new nonprofit that wanted the building but not the land, and they were happy to have me managing that. And so I was able to stay. And what saved the farm in those 2 years of operating a little under the radar was just relationships I'd built. So the sustainability of our farm is depending on dollars and cents, but like anything, it's going to depend almost as much on relationships. So people kind of just went to bat for us in the meantime of just let it keep going for a while, So, but it's pretty stressful, and it didn't help us get forward. It just helped us kind of maintain for a couple years. So it did set us back. So other things to navigate with this kind of method, the long-term maintenance of the infrastructure. So we're 7, 8 years in now, and stuff's breaking, and we've outgrown the infrastructure. And so our business has a hard time fundraising or using our revenues for big expenses. So we need to install a water line. We need to install a second cooler. We need to fix the greenhouse that was first put on site. So that's something to keep in mind when these are started. And then lastly, a big issue to navigate is equity for the farmer, for whoever's putting in their time and energy and expertise into making this place a farm. If that's a benefit to the community, it has to work for the farmer too. And in urban settings and in rural settings too, a lot of farmers lease their land or rent it. And for me at the beginning, it wasn't such a big deal, because I was like, I don't know if this is going to work. And so now we're 7 years in, and I think it's going to work, but does it work if I'm not getting any value from that in the long run, or if I need to leave that land or that business? You're essentially left with whatever you earned from your salary over the years, or you're not investing in long term, which is sort of a bedrock of farming. It's a long game, and a lot of times urban ag is a short game. So that's just something to navigate. Any questions before I move on from that topic about our startup? Yeah.
Do you have a sunset to your lease?
A sunset? No. Right now, the organization that owns the land is supportive, but it's still a year-to-year on that land. And then on our other parcel we farm, we don't have a lease. We're still working through that, but it'll be a year-to-year also. Yeah. Yep.
Well, why didn't you just kind of create your own nonprofit, find 3 people and start a nonprofit and then drop it over there?
Yeah. Well, one reason was that the initial funding that purchased that site had a lot of strings attached to it. It was federal money, and so that wasn't an option for me. Another reason is I left working in nonprofits only because I wanted to try the business side, and I felt like making that work was important, just in skill building and understanding that aspect of farming. But yeah. So, okay, yeah, one more.
For creative funding, is there any
I'll talk about that a little later, sort of. Yeah, thank you. So I'll talk about now tools and techniques we use. You know, our production goals are basically to maximize what we can grow on the space that we have. We grow on 2 acres, so it's not huge. Use organic methods, use diversity to keep the system healthy and things like that. So we've been really happy with all the innovations and leaps forward the small farming has made, and we've just grabbed onto as many of those as we can. So all of our beds are no-till. They're all permanent beds. You know, we use the broad fork and the tilther and tarps in our system. So we get 2 to 4 crops out of every bed every year. And so we couldn't obviously plant a crop, till it in, do that again, do that again, and do that again. So we just have rotations that we can use either landscape fabric to cover the soil, or if it's greens, you know, we cut the greens and use the tarp to decompose that plant matter. You know, all the techniques that are emerging now from the small acreage farms. We're trying to try all of them, and have been, you know, it's just changed our system 100% since year 1, all for the better. So the no-till, and then we've been using labor-saving tools that have come out. We're super happy with the greens harvester. You can see Leslie there using it. We just got a paper pot transplanter this spring. Anybody else playing around with those? Yeah, I don't know what your experience is, but so far we're all kind of a little bit giddy, a little bit high on the paper pot transplanter. So I think it's really going to help us be efficient on our tiny acreage, you know, and then just using different seeders so we're not out there thinning our carrots and stuff. So, you know, some obvious things that have come up in the farm world. And then season extension is real important. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to point out that right now the paper pots are not certified organic, and that
True.
They just ruled on that.
True.
So,
Yep. See, tensions and compromises. This is a compromise we are willing to make. When we plant, you know, 50-foot beds of spinach, 6 inches apart, 4 rows, we're bending over. I'm gonna make that compromise. It's such a good tool. It's such a good tool. Season extension. I used to, for the first 5 years, I couldn't afford a tunnel, so I would use low tunnels, shade cloth, row cover, all that, which is really important for the business. And now, 2 years ago, we were able to do a crowdfunding campaign and raised over $10,000 from our customers to put up some high tunnels. And then last year got a NRCS grant to put up another bigger tunnel. So you see the NRCS one being built there. And so those, obviously, I don't need to say much about season extension for profitability. Yeah?
Did you have to get a building permit to put them in?
Nope. We have a zoning which is commercial special. So in our original plan, we said, oh, there'll be some high tunnels on site, this big at this place. And so with that zoning, we had some leeway.
Are you still the 1.5 acres, and how many people does it take to work this in?
What a good question. So where are we now? We had a dramatic farm merger 2.5 years ago. Myself and the other for-profit urban farmer in town, we married our businesses, and so that helped tremendously for efficiency. You know, my growth had just reached a plateau, not a very high one, but a plateau of, you know, I had hired help and stuff, but I couldn't do much more. I needed more farmers and more brains and more, you know, man and woman power. But so we merged. And then last year we took on a third partner to our business. So we're now the Mad Farmers Collective in honor of the great Wendell Berry, inspired by, I guess I should say, his Mad Farmer poems. So we're not angry, really. And then, so we have 3 business partners, 2 farm sites, 2 acres in cultivation, and we have a variety of part-time help, and then a few, probably 5 to 6 work shares throughout the year. So we supply 2 summer markets, a winter market, and then have a pretty good grocery business. So our sales are split almost in half between restaurant and small groceries and direct markets. And again, trying to specialize, trying to make those hard choices about what's actually profitable and what we just feel good about bringing to market, and trying to narrow that down. And then other things we do on the farm, we partner a lot with Purdue Extension to do farm training. There's a lot of things we can't do with our small business that we want to do. And so a nice compromise is partnering to help train other growers who are doing those things. So we do some workshops and tours with them, as well as helping them with a new program. They have an urban agriculture certificate program that a lot of residents of our county have been taking part in the past 2 years. We got a SARE grant this year, doing a specialized part of our wash station just for salad greens, and hoping that makes it all more efficient. Salad greens are obviously a profit engine of a small farm. And then we helped start a small, or a new farmer's market on the south side, close to our farm. So, tensions in being an urban agriculture business are many, so many. So we're 7-8 years in, and we're sort of wrestling with the decisions of, are we a sustainable farm? I know I'm supposed to be here telling you how to make a sustainable urban business, but we're really wrestling with that right now. Are we sustainable? What do we need to be to get? What do we need to do to get there? So one tension that we have is, Brennan made a good list of all the benefits of urban ag, and as a small business, we're not touching on a lot of those. That we're trying to do what we can and structure our business so we're community minded, but unfortunately, a lot of times we're focused on the day-to-day, harvest the arugula, get it to market, things that are going to sustain the farm, which is normal. That's what any small farm does. But when you're plopped in the middle of the city and you're kind of in that context of urban agriculture solves problems, we want to, and we do feel that pressure. I wish our business solved those problems. I wish we fixed the food desert and things like that. But we don't, but we're trying to be as good of a community-minded business as we can. And I was, again, glad to hear Brennan touch on this. We do feel a lot of tension being a for-profit in a nonprofit world. Most of the urban ag in our city is nonprofit. And so when we walk into a restaurant kitchen and see produce from a nonprofit farm, that is just part of the business. We compete with folks who are subsidized in some way. I'm not saying that's necessarily bad, because obviously they have other aims too, but it's a tension in our world, in our little world. Land, we've lost land to nonprofits. We wanted to buy 10 acres down the road in the city. We spent months, this is our latest heartbreak, we spent months building proposals and working our relationships, and found an investor, and we put an offer in, and that land was outbid by a large nonprofit with no farm experience, but they had money. So it's reality that even if your goals are aligned, you're still kind of competing for resources with these nonprofits. And then we've lost staff. Nonprofits can pay better and better hours and less stress probably. Sorry. Than operating a farm where you're depending on, it not hailing on your crops. So anyway, we feel that tension all the time. And then we just don't have access to grants because we're not a nonprofit, except for SARE. It's a tension for us. And then also just financial sustainability. This is a tension for small farms in general, but in the urban environment, with our short-term leases, some of our costs are a lot higher. For instance, water. We're paying for city water, and we're paying a meter every day. We have a meter on a fire hydrant, and if that gets taken away, we don't have a farm. But that is an extra cost. So anyway, the financial sustainability is a big deal. So we do have to ask ourselves, what would that look like for us? Should we sell the farm and move to the country? Leave the farm and move to the country? So for us to be sustainable, are these 3 farmers happy and healthy? Are our crops happy and healthy? That means we're managing things well. Does our revenue cover our costs? This is obvious, but what do we include in that? Are we putting away retirement money? Are we paying our own health care? Are we generating what you should for having 10 years of experience? And that's it's a personal decision, is that working or not? So Are we sustainable? How do we feel that day? I'm not sure how we would answer that on any given day, but and then is our business well regarded in the community? So just to sum up, what we've decided that we need to be to call it sustainable and to kind of professionalize our work and to kind of grow up a little bit as a business. Long-term lease, maybe with equity option or a path to ownership, would be really important to think this is sustainable for us. We feel like we need more citywide support in terms of policy, or in our area we don't have a network of a formal Moses type entity in our area. We think that would be really important. We've had to go to bat for ourselves with the city when zoning issues come up and things like that. So there's not always someone to turn to, an entity that can help us work through that. We're going to bat for ourselves right now with the water company to try to get a more sustainable solution. So, it's hard to do all those things as a small business. Permanent affordable water source, sufficient land base in one location. We have 2 locations. There's definitely inefficiencies there. And then commercial scale infrastructure. We need to up our game on infrastructure. And then relationships. And we're doing a decent job there, but we do feel like that's a piece of our sustainability. So yeah, I mentioned most of those things of how we're going to get there. But yeah, I do think that being a business in urban ag in a city is a kind of a funny dance that we're doing in the agriculture world. So we have a few yards to go before I would call us truly sustainable.